Banks didn't mention anything about personality disorder at all. What she did mention was whom she felt gave a more accurate version of...
Objection, Your Honor.
What's the objection?
That's a credibility testimony.
I think he can testify to that.
I'll sustain the objection. Next question.
What, if anything, did Dr. Banks report, not saying what the ultimate conclusion was, what, if anything, did Dr. Banks say about what was reported to her by Ms. Heard and Mr. Depp and how they responded?
So Ms. Heard discussed in trying to, again, as a victim, trying to save the relationship, discussed with Dr. Banks these accusations, these facts of intimate partner violence. Mr. Depp.
Objection.
Prime Plus lets you take them everywhere.
I think he's entitled to rely on hearsay, and he's not giving what ultimately was. He's entitled to it. That's my.
You can rely on hearsay, but you just can't state the hearsay. So you can rely on it.
All right. What, if anything, did Mr. Depp do in response?
Mr. Depp said nothing when Ms. Heard accused him of intimate partner violence. Mr. Depp said nothing.
And what is the significance
Objection,
of that?
hearsay.
I'll sustain the objection.
All right. And what is the significance of that?
The significance of that is with...
Objection, no foundation.
Sustain.
Okay. All right. We'll move on. You were asked about MDMA and what the impact could potentially be of taking 8 to 10 of these pills. Do you recall?
Yes.
Okay. And now I'm going to take you to Australia 2015. You've reviewed testimony over that, right, from Mr. Depp, Ms. Heard,
yes.
And a number. Okay. Do you recall that Ms. Heard also said that she found dime bags of cocaine in drawers at the end of that 3 days?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to ask you, Michelle, can you impact could potentially be of taking 8 to 10 of these pills? Do you recall?
Yes.
Okay. And now I'm going to take you to Australia 2015. Okay, You've reviewed testimony over that, right, from Mr. Depp. This is one of the pictures that was taken in Australia. Do you recall that Ms. Heard also said that she found over? Is that something that could be the impact of having 8 to 10 tablets of MDMA and combining that with cocaine and alcohol?
Objection, no foundation. Speculation.
The foundation's already been laid, Your Honor. That's...
I'll sustain the objection. Next question.
Okay. What, if anything, if you look at the painted canvases on this one, what, if any, that she found is that something that could be the impact of having 8 to 10 tablets of MDMA and combining that with cocaine and alcohol?
Objection, no foundation. Speculation.
You testified earlier about property, destruction of property. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Okay. Could you tell the jury how that relates to the correlating factors of risk factors for IPV?
Again, destruction of property is a form of psychological abuse, psychological mistreatment. And so destruction of property is used as intimidation and as means of control.
Okay. Michelle, can you bring up 1829? And this has already been admitted. Yes, thank you, Your Honor. And what, if any, evidence does this reflect as correlating behavior to risk factors of IPV?
I would say that, one, that demonstrates a good deal of violence and psychological abuse. I think it's pretty clear that they're trying to be intimidating. I don't think...
Objection, Your Honor.
Overruled. Thank you. Please continue.
It would be people who would misuse ecstasy without cocaine, are prone to agitation, suspicion, jealousy, violence. What we're seeing there would be very consistent with that presentation.
Okay. Thank you. Michelle, can you now bring up 1830, I guess? And that's already been admitted into evidence as well, Your Honor. I'd ask that it be published. And what, if any, evidence does this correlate with behavior indicative of IPV perpetration?
Again, this is intimidation, psychological abuse, where you're solely trying to emotionally.
Objection, Your Honor. Can we be heard?
Okay, if you want to.
Dr. Spiegel, if you can answer the question, what, if any, evidence is this correlating to the risk factors for IPV perpetrator?
Again, I think the violence comes through.
Objection, Your Honor.
Just the evidence of risk factors, if you can.
The evidence of risk factor would be accepting more than average a degree of violence, as well as psychological abuse.
Okay. Are you aware of any record evidence of Ms. Heard writing on walls, mirrors, countertops, or painting canvases?
No.
Okay. Thank you, Michelle. You can take that down now. Now, you were also asked about Seroquel and some of the other prescription medications. Did you, during the course of your review of evidence, see the lists of medications that Mr. Depp was on at one point?
Yes, I read that list.
Michelle, I'm going to ask you to bring up Defendant's Exhibit 301. And Dr. Spiegel, it's not into evidence yet. I'm going to ask you to take a look at this. Is this one of the documents that you had that reflected the amount of medication that Mr. Depp was on as of October 26, 2014?
Yes.
Okay. And this was an email from Debbie Lloyd to Dr. Blaustein, his treating psychiatrist, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, can you tell the jury that we've got Seroquel, 50 mg? Can you
Objection, hearsay.
Can you just tell the jury? I haven't finished asking the question yet. So,
Let's approach.
okay. Michelle, could you scroll up just so I can see all of them at the same time? Thank you. So, Dr. Siegel, if someone was taking 50 milligrams of Seroquel, 25 milligrams of Seroquel, and 50 milligrams of Seroquel and 50 all in one day, how would that impact them?
So,
Michelle, can you scroll up just
obviously
so I can
this
see
is
all of
not
them at
for
the same time?
because
Thank you.
presumably
So,
not wanting to sleep in the morning,
Dr.
noon, and from 4 to 6, although you're sleeping at night. What I would say is he's using it for one purpose. As I say, with substance use disorder, they're using it to calm down. They're using it just as a down and to relax. And given that you're taking 45 milligrams of Adderall a day to stay awake, and that's more than the prescribed for adults and children for that matter, The combination makes very little sense at all to me.
And if a person was taking 300 milligrams of Neurotin, I'm going to pronounce that wrong again.
Neuron.
4 times a day and 600 later in the day, how would that impact?
Again,
person?
you're looking at medications that are there solely for a substance use disorder patient to get them up and to calm them down. That's all this regimen is about. Gabapentin doesn't have a psychiatric indication other than, actually doesn't have psychiatric indication, although it does calm you down. And it, as I may have intimated before, similar to Adderall, gabapentin is also abusable. Similar to quetiapine, Seroquel is also abusable. So you're getting these kind of unusually calming effects from these medicines while at the same time getting what's called a super therapeutic dose or an excessive amount of Adderall. And for the record book, adults are only indicated with Adderall for the extended release, not the immediate release preparation. And why that's relevant is the immediate release preparation is more abusable. You get more high quicker. The extended release goes out throughout the day. The immediate release gets you up right away and then down. Now in ADHD, this medicine is very effective. But from what this is being used for, clearly based on the combination, no.
All right. Do addicts lie?
Yes.
All right. Now, you were asked about Mr. Depp passing out. Do you recall reading testimony of Mr. Depp passing out in the bathroom in his vomit?
Yes.
Okay. Does that help refresh your recollection of what
Yes.
you recall?
Siegel, if
for the record book, I don't
someone
think
was
that
taking
falling asleep with ice cream on
50
is a
Objection beyond the scope of the
Gets
question.
you up right away and then
Keep
down.
going.
Now in ADHD, taking Seroquel
This
at
medicine
night
is very effective.
and falling
From what
asleep
this is being used
with
for,
ice cream on
clearly based on the
is
combination.
not what Seroquel is indicated for. It's not meant to put you out in a state where you
All right.
don't even
Do
get
addicts
stay
lie?
awake to put ice cream away.
Yes.
All right.
All right.
Michelle, if you can pull
Now,
up
you-
defendant's 1090.
Mr. Depp passing out. Do you recall reading
That's already into
testimony
evidence.
of Mr. Depp passing out in the bathroom in his
If we
vomit?
can publish that to the jury, Your Honor.
Does that help? refresh
Dr.
your
Spiegel, does this look like, would this be evidence correlating with behaviors consistent with IPV perpetrator risk factors?
This would be correlated a person who is completely knocked out, and it's usually only one way someone gets knocked out that badly, and that's with pharmacological assistance, whether it be legal or illegal. They make it to the bed, they don't sleep with their head on a game box in a furniture. That doesn't happen to people who sleep, no matter how tired you are. No matter how tired. I've been a resident in the past, and I was up for 40, 45 hours.
Objection beyond the scope.
It's just explained and done.
Sustained.
All right. Michelle, can you pull up 1095, please?
Behaviors consistent with IPV perpetrator risk factors?
This would be correlated a person who is furniture that knocked out, and it's usually only one way someone gets, no matter how tired.
I'm going to ask you the same question, Dr. Spiegel. What, if anything, does this indicate relating to risk factors for IPV perpetrators?
Again, colloquially passed out, and there's very few ways to get like that without pharmacological assistance, legal or illegal, and or illegal.
And then let's pull up 1094, please, Michelle. Defense, and that's also been admitted.
I'm going to ask you the same question, Dr. Spiegel.
And now we have the ice cream picture. And what, if any, indication does this have?
Probably could see how I could
Objection, speculation, no foundation.
What, if any, correlation, what, if any, evidence does this indicate correlative with the risk factors for IPV perpetrators?
Again, this proves one of the major risk factors and precipitating factors for intimate partner violence.
Objection,
You are a
move to strike.
All right, sustained. I'll strike it from the record. Next question.
We'll just move on. You were asked about earpieces. Do you recall reviewing Tracy Jacobs and Joel Mandel's depositions?
Yes.
All right. And do you recall them both testifying that Mr. Depp had someone on salary to feed him his lines?
Yes.
Okay. Now, you've testified that you reviewed a substantial amount of evidence in this case. Did you find any evidence that Amber Heard exhibited conduct or behaviors indicative or consistent with any of the risk factors for perpetrators of IPV?
Objection beyond the scope.
Sustained.
Well, it was suggested with the borderline personality.
Sustained.
Okay. But you did find that for Mr. Depp, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And did you find record evidence that Mr. Depp had a substance abuse disorder?
Severe substance use disorder.
Did any of the questions asked by Mr. Depp's counsel change any of your opinions in this case?
Nothing there. No, not my opinion has not been swayed an iota.
Okay. Do you hold them all still within a reasonable degree of medical and psychiatric probability or certainty?
Absolutely, yes.
Thank you very much, Dr. Spiegel.
All right, thank you. Sir, you can have a seat in the courtroom or you're free to go. Thank you. All right, your next witness.
My next witness is Catherine Arnold.
Catherine Arnold.
Thank you very much, Dr.
All right. Sir, you can have a seat in the courtroom or you're free to go. Thank you. All right, your next witness.
My next witness is Catherine.
All right, yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Will you please state your name for the record?
Catherine Arnold.
All right. And what is your profession?
I am an entertainment industry consultant, and I also serve as an expert witness.
Okay. And can you please tell the jury your educational background?
Yes. So I've been in the entertainment industry for over 20 plus years. I started as an assistant at ICM, which is one of the largest talent agencies in Los Angeles that represents actors, writers, and directors. And I worked with the talent agent there. And then I also worked at William Morris, for William Morris as a script reader. So I was working on scripts that they were delivered and submitted to for their actors, writers, and directors. After that, I went into development of film and television projects for a company based in New York called the Maltese Company, which actually produced animated television shows and feature films based on Wall Street, animated product, like toys. And then I went to work with a company called the Goober Peters Company. And Goober Peters was, at the time, one of the largest production companies in Los Angeles. They did films like Batman and Rain Man and Tango and Cash. They did TV shows like Witches of Eastwick. And there I was involved in the development of scripts. We worked with the studio directly in terms of what cast would be attached to the scripts and brought directors and talent to those projects. I then went on to work in, there's a lot. I went on to work in the independent film world as a film producer. So I found the material, I would get the financing, I would get the cast and the director attached to the project. We call that packaging. And then we would go and obtain financing for that either through equity sources or international sales and financing and bank financing. And then I also went on after that. I produced 5 or 6 films with actors that you may know, including Salma Hayek, Vincent D'Onofrio, Kirstie Alley, Thomas Jane, Ethan Hawke. And then I worked with a international sales and production company where I was the head of production, and I worked again on the development of scripts and the procurement of financing. So I worked in both the independent world and the studio world, meaning independently financed or financed by the big studios like Warner Brothers and Disney and Paramount and such as that. That's the bulk of my work in the entertainment industry.
Did any of your films win awards?
A couple of them did. So a couple of the independent films that I produced, one of them won, called The Coriolis Effect, won the Venice Film Festival in its category. And then I also produced another film that won the Heartland Film Festival Award. It's called the Crystal Award.
And what other video production projects have you been involved in?
So throughout that time, in between those jobs, I also worked in the corporate world. So large studios like Warner Brothers and Disney and CBS would need corporate videos for their live events. So I would interview executives and interview their talent and then edit the piece together to create video and media for their live sales conferences that they had at that time. And then I also produced some commercials.
All right. And what, if any, experience did you have in corporate relations and licensing?
So early on in my career, I worked at the Los Angeles Olympic Organizing Committee, and I worked in the licensing department where we handled the licensing of the Olympic logo, and we also worked with sponsors and suppliers who were funding those Olympic Games. So it was a lot of contractual negotiations with the use of the logo, as well as raising money for the games and working with those corporate sponsors throughout the 2 years prior to the games and then during the games themselves.
And what, if any, experience do you have working on film festivals?
Well, I've had films in festivals. I've actually been very lucky to travel the world and gone to a lot of festivals with my films, both here in the United States and elsewhere. And at one point, I was also hired to raise sponsorship funds for the Sundance Film Festival. They had a new program that they were starting to do online festivals. And so I raised about $500,000 for them in about a month.
All right. And do you have a degree, a college degree?
Yes, I graduated from UCLA with a bachelor's degree in economics.
What does your current consulting practice entail?
So as an entertainment consultant, having been in the business in both the independent and the studio worlds as both a producer and an executive, I work with investment companies and production companies who are looking to navigate the various inroads of Hollywood. It's a business that's very different and unlike anything else and very relationship-based. So I use my 20 years of experience to help them get cast, get financing, understand the distribution process, marketing process, and get them set up to be able to produce their films.
Have you ever testified as an expert witness in the field of entertainment industry?
Yes.
Okay. Approximately how many times have you served as an expert?
I've been involved in somewhere between 85 and 100 cases as an expert, from beginning stages to testifying in court.
And have you ever testified as an expert on damages and defamation cases?
Yes, I have.
Okay. And approximately how many times have you qualified as an expert on that?
On defamation?
Yes.
I believe 3 or 4 times.
Okay. And have you ever been admitted to testify as an expert on damages?
Yes.
Okay. And how many times have you qualified as an expert on damages?
Almost all my cases have some form of damage economic damage related to the case. So I would say in all of the cases that I've testified in, I've been qualified in damages.
Okay. Have you ever served as an expert for both? Have you served as an expert for both plaintiffs and defendants?
Yes, I have.
Okay. How much of your current practice involves consulting as opposed to serving as an expert witness?
So over the last 10 or 12 years, it's been about 50-50. So I spend half my time working as a consultant and the other half working with lawyers on their cases.
Your Honor, I'm going to move to qualify Catherine Arnold as an expert in the entertainment industry, standards and practices, and related economic damages.
All right. Any objection? All right. So moved.
Thank you. Now, you have a dual role here as an expert, correct?
Yes.
Now, you're going to be testifying with respect to Mr. Depp's challenges to or claims of damages, and you're also going to be testifying to Amber Heard's damages, correct?
Yes.
All right. Well, I'm going to start you with Mr. Depp's claims for damages.
Okay.
With respect to Mr. Depp's claimed damages, on what subject have you been asked to offer your opinion?
So I was asked to assess any alleged damages that the op-ed piece in the Washington Post that Ms. Heard wrote, whether that impacted his career in any way, particularly did he lose any income or any economic opportunities because of the op-ed piece specifically.
All right. And have you been asked to limit that to the period of December 18, 2018, with the date of the op-ed, through November 2, 2020?
Yes.
Okay. Now, what materials did you review in making your analysis?
There were a lot of documents. I reviewed the pleadings of the case, the complaints, the discovery items, the responses to what they call interrogatories, which are the questions that the lawyers ask both sides. I reviewed Mr. Depp's deposition testimony, which there were volumes of that, as well as Ms. Heard's. I also reviewed the deposition testimony of the experts that were proffered that had to do with the entertainment industry, the agents and the management teams of both sides. Ron Schnell, the data expert. I also reviewed emails and texts between the parties, between their families, between their management teams, the audio recordings, the visual recordings that have been presented in this case and the previous cases that have been involved in the last couple of years. I also did my own independent research from general publicity and press and investigative articles, as well as those that are specific to the entertainment industry, and utilized some entertainment industry specific sources to get some information that was helpful to my case, to the case.
Thank you, Ms. Arnold. Please describe for the jury your observations with respect to Mr. Depp's career trajectory.
Well, Mr. Depp has had an extraordinary career over many years, so it's a long one to look at. Obviously, he was a rising star in the late 80s and in the 90s, starting with 21 Jump Street, and you've heard, all the films that I'm sure he's been in. He really started to break through when he worked with Tim Burton, the director, and of course his character Jack Sparrow in Pirates of the Caribbean was, world renowned. And probably his biggest role. And he was, a well-liked, both critically and within the industry and within the public as a movie star. And at the same time, his behavior and both on and off the set, in his personal life and in his professional life, start to interfere with what we would say, what everybody saw was his great talent. And it started, there's some stories of issues that started back in the 80s and the 90s, but I would say really in the mid-2000s, between 2006 and 10, is when the behavior started affecting his work to a certain extent in terms of lateness on set. And then as Ms. Jacobs, his talent agent, discussed with you in her deposition, it really started to affect her ability to get roles and the industry's willingness to work with him, given the issues that he was having with both behavior, tardiness, drinking, and the drug abuse, and other issues in his personal life. So it got more complicated for her to find him work, and I think it got harder for production companies and studios to hire him due to the challenges that would put on a production.
And when did Mr. Depp's career downturn begin, based on your review of all the record evidence?
Well, again, according to Ms. Jacobs, his agent, she mentioned that it started getting more challenging for her around 2010. The lateness on set she was being made aware of that more and more often from production executives and the producers that she was working with on the Pirates movie. And not only Pirates, it continued on the other films, including Mordecai and Murder on the Orient Express. And in around 2014, when he had the appearance, it was presumed that he was under the effects of alcohol at the Hollywood Film Awards in 2014.
Objection, Your Honor. Non-responsive.
She's answering the career downturn, Your Honor.
Overruled.
Please continue.
Thank you. In 2014, when Mr. Depp appeared in the Hollywood Film Awards, Ms. Jacobs received many phone calls from both producers, casting directors, and production executives asking her what is going on with your client, why, what's going on with his behavior, can we get him under control? And then I think it really started to shift around the Pirates 5 movie in Australia with, again, the lateness and the issues with the singer that stopped production and things of that nature. And then it got harder and harder.
Now, based on your analysis, what has caused Mr. Depp's career downturn?
Objection. No foundation.
Overruled.
Can you please repeat the question?
Based on your analysis, what has caused Mr. Depp's career downturn? And I realize you've said a number of those, so just, is there anything else?
Sure. Well, we've talked about the erratic behavior, the tardiness, the drugs and alcohol abuse, and the lawsuits have had a really big impact, not just this lawsuit, but previous lawsuits that Mr. Depp has been involved with, because there's a lot of publicity around anything that he does. And every time he has filed a lawsuit, it has brought to light various issues with respect to whatever that lawsuit was about, whether it was about, erratic behavior or domestic abuse or drugs and alcohol and even spending habits. So every time a lawsuit has been filed, the press and the publicity has just been charged up and brought everything back to light. And it's been an unfortunate problem for on that level for the industry to continue to work with him, even though all this is out in the public.
For the films that were shortly before Pirates 5, how successful were they? We're talking Mordecai, Alice Through the Looking Glass. I think you testified to some of those. The Lone Ranger, Tonto.
Right.
Objection. Compound.
Overruled.
Of course, Mr. Depp has had some obviously extremely successful films, but also in the 4 or 5 years prior and, through Pirates, there were films that didn't do well at all and were considered what the industry calls a bomb, which could have been Alice Through the Looking Glass, The Transcendence, the Lone Ranger, and Mordecai were films that just didn't perform, although they were valued in their financing based on Mr. Depp's star quality and acting ability. Unfortunately, they just didn't perform. So as many hits as he's also had a lot of recent, what they call failures in the business.
And what, if anything, did Mr. Depp do with respect to showing up for a press conference in Japan for Mordecai?
Ms. Jacobs mentioned in her deposition testimony that Mr. Depp didn't show up for the press conference in Mordecai, which he was not only an actor for, he was also a producer, and he didn't show up. Apparently he was sleeping, so he wasn't able to make it.
Okay. Now, what, if any, impact did the Brooks litigation have on Mr. Depp's career?
Is the jury familiar with this already, or?
Well, I think you can,
Okay. So the Brooks litigation was, there was a litigation around Mr. Depp had punched someone on I think it was a location manager on the set of a film called City of Lies. I don't know exactly what happened to that litigation. However, of course, again, it was written a lot about in the press, and unfortunately came to the forefront that he had, violent behavior yet again.
So in 2018, and I'm going to say before the op-ed on December 18, 2018,
right.
Was there any negative articles, negative press about Mr. Depp?
For quite a while, when you're a celebrity such as Mr. Depp, you're in the limelight and everybody wants to look at everything that happens. So after every movie or after every incident, there was usually press. But the ones that were more significant were the ones in the Hollywood, a couple of them in the Hollywood Reporter and one in the Rolling Stone. So in 2017, there was an article in the Hollywood Reporter where the journalist discussed, I think the article was called Pirates of the Caribbean, The Diminishing Returns of Johnny Depp. And that Pirates, the last one was 5, right? And that one didn't perform nearly as well as the other previous Pirates of the Caribbean films. And there was some discussion that the character...
Objection. Hearsay, Your Honor.
I think you could explain generally.
Sustained.
Okay. Let me ask you this. When was that Hollywood Reporter article on diminishing returns of Johnny Depp?
That was in the spring of 2017.
Okay. And you said, and I just want to make sure we understand, how well did Pirates 5 do compared to 1 through 4?
It performed less well by over $200 million.
Okay. What, if any, other negative press was there in this time frame? We'll take 2017, 2018, before the op-ed.
So in 2018, there was the Rolling Stones article that was an in-depth expose on Mr. Depp's life. Again, his erratic behavior, the money he was spending on wine.
Objection, Your Honor, hearsay.
I think she can give generally, Your Honor, the negative.
Sustain.
All right. What, if any, knowledge do you have of whether Disney saw the Rolling Stone article?
There were emails between the publicity department and the co-chairs and some of the senior executive Disney that they would forward the articles as they came out, both the Hollywood Reporter article and the Rolling Stones article, and they would make commentary. And Alan Horn, who is the one of the co-chairs of Disney, used the word sad, and I think one of the other executives used depressing, that their film star was now being shown in this light to the public in a Rolling Stones magazine.
Objection, hearsay.
Sustained.
All right. Was there any more articles about Pirates of the Caribbean prior to the op-ed in December of 2018?
There was an article in October 28th, the Hollywood Reporter, October 28th, 2018, where the journalist had spoken to two writers of the film, and they were talking
Objection,
about rebooting
hearsay.
the franchise.
She's entitled to rely on hearsay, and she's just giving the general. She's not.
Approach.
So without saying what the article said, say what it's about.
Okay. So in October 28th, the article was about whether the Pirates of the Caribbean
Objection,
franchise
hearsay.
would be rebooted without.
Overruled.
Please continue.
In the article in October of 2018 was about whether or not the Pirates franchise was going to be what they call redefined without Johnny Depp, and that was regarding two writers that were on the project.
Okay. And
there was one other one I'd like to talk
go ahead,
about.
please.
So there was another article, there was an expose on the president of production. It was also in the Hollywood Reporter. And this is the one that Mr. Marks, Mr. Depp's expert, pointed to regarding the op-ed's impact on Mr. Depp's career. And the online article was, as Mr. Marks pointed out, published on December 20th of 2018. But the same article was in print on the morning of December 18th, 2018, which is the same morning of the op-ed. So that Hollywood Reporter article that Mr. Marks used to say—
Objection, no foundation.
Overruled.
Please continue.
Mr. Marks had used that article to show that Disney wanted to let go of Mr. Depp because of the op-ed, but it was actually printed in the Reporter the same morning that the Washington Post article was printed. So there's no way that the Washington Post article had any impact on what the Hollywood Reporter journalist wrote. So they were on the same morning. They were released simultaneously, interestingly enough.
And the one that was 2 days later was the same article, just online?
Same article, it was just online, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Now, what, if anything, was there about press in 2018 relating to the Sun and Dan Wooten and any litigation that
Right.
Mr. Depp
So-
was bringing?
So a lot of press was about the UK trial in the lawsuit that Mr. Depp brought against the Sun in the UK about the wife beater title that they used. So there was a ton of press around that, both at the time that it was filed and throughout as documents were being shared with the public, and then, of course, during the trial itself.
Okay. And what is your understanding of when the article, the wife beater article, first appeared?
I believe it was in July of 2018, about 6 months before the op-ed piece.
And what is your understanding of when Mr. Depp filed suit against the Sun and Mr. Wooten?
Again, in 2018, I believe.
Okay. June, would it be? Would it refresh your recollection?
It was in the spring or summer. It was fairly shortly after the article, so it was long before the op-ed piece was out.
Okay. And what, if any, impact did Mr. Depp's litigation in the Sun case have on his career?
That was a really tough one on Mr. Depp's career because every allegation of abuse and every text, every email, all the audio, all the visual stuff was brought to light and made public. And so not only did the public get to see it, but the industry was watching Glee. And it's hard for studios, especially a studio like Disney, who's family oriented, be connected to a star that has texts about burnt corpses and violent behavior in video. So it was a big conflict for a lot of the people in the industry to how to navigate that if they're going to work with a star.
And what, if any, impact did Mr. Depp's other litigation against Mandel and Bloom have during that time period?
As I was trying to say earlier, every time Mr. Depp brings a lawsuit, because he's such a well-known public figure, the spotlight goes on him. So every time a lawsuit was filed, whether it was to against his business manager, against his former lawyer, even when he fired his talent agent, it becomes news. And then everybody talks about what could have preceded that. Why would that lawsuit have happened? And then they look at the details. So again, the erratic behavior and the financial issues and the drinking and drug abuse was all part and parcel of every one of those. And it was brought to light yet again each time.
What is your understanding of Mr. Depp's claims regarding Pirates of the Caribbean 6 and how that impacted?
Well, Mr. Depp is claiming that he's lost money on Pirate 6, but Pirate 6 hasn't even been made yet, nor is there even a script that has been what we call greenlit, moved towards production. So I don't know how you lose something that hasn't happened. So I think that's what you're looking for me to.
And in fact, since Mr. Depp's damages are limited November 2, 2020 and nothing since, and that hasn't happened, is there any way he could claim damages for Pirate 6?
Well,
Objection leading.
Overruled.
Again, you can't claim damages for something that hasn't even happened, whether he was in it or not in it, or was going to be in it, or might have been in it, whether it was 2018 or now. There just is no Pirate 6. Not only did he not have a contract, even back in the day, 2018 or after that, no contract had been signed for a Pirate 6. It doesn't exist as we.
Objection legal
today.
conclusion.
Staying at the last part.
How do you know he doesn't have a legal contract?
Well, Ms. Jacobs said he didn't have a legal contract, and also his agents at CAA said he had not yet negotiated a contract for Pirate 6. And again, there is no script, so they haven't greenlit it, as we say. They don't have it cast or with the director yet.
Okay. Based on your analysis, what, if any, impact did Ms. Heard's op-ed have on whether Mr. Depp could claim a loss for Pirate 6?
Zero.
Okay. And why do you say that?
Again, well, many things. The movie doesn't exist yet, so that's one. But even as important is that Disney, in their file for this trial, did not have the op-ed piece as part of all of the information they had read and looked about and discussed. The conversations of Mr. Depp not being in whatever new version of Pirates, the franchise that goes forward, those were in discussions long before the op-ed piece even came out. And there are other factors that Disney was considering: the lateness on set, the cost overruns that costs, which can go from hundreds of thousands of dollars to millions of dollars when you have crews sitting around for 2 to 4 hours, 8 hours, or even several weeks to a month when the finger incident happened. So on top of that, Mr. Depp is an expensive actor. He can earn between $20 and $25 million per movie plus back end. So it's very expensive. So when you put that all together, the rising cost of Mr. Depp's talent, the challenges that they had to keep it on budget because of his lateness and his tardiness and all the other allegations that would affect a brand such as Disney, right? Someone talks about a burnt corpse does not necessarily coincide with the brand of Disney. So there were many problems. And interestingly enough, there was a lot of conversation internally in the industry.
Objection, hearsay.
She's entitled to rely on hearsay, Your Honor.
Sustained, you can't say that's hearsay.
All right. Please continue without saying what the discussion in the industry was.
The Jack Sparrow character had been exhausted in terms of where it could go creatively. And I think the studio is looking for a way for it to renew the franchise, but not necessarily base it entirely on the Jack Sparrow character, which is where it had ended up the last couple of years.
Okay. And
evidenced by the lesser box office of Pirates 5 compared to the earlier ones.
Right. And was there any article that came out on November 5, 2020, 3 days after the damages are cut off, relating to Pirates of the Caribbean and Mr. Depp's chances of being Jack Sparrow?
I think they reiterated the fact that he was probably not going to be in the movie.
Okay. Now, what impact has the op-ed had on Mr. Depp's career?
Very little. Hardly anybody even knew the op-ed existed before he filed suit.
Okay.
If anybody that I know, but certainly not Disney.
Okay. And what impact has the op-ed had on Mr. Depp's Q scores?
According to what I read of Mr. Alan Jacobs, an expert in statistical analysis, and from my own research on websites that are available to us, Mr. Depp's Q score, or if you're familiar with IMDb, which is Internet Movie Database, which is available to public and to the professional side, his Q score did not change dramatically. It was kind of in the middle of exactly the high and low of his Q scores overall. It was in the middle. It was at like 113, which is where it was a couple weeks before and a couple weeks after. So the op-ed didn't have any effect on his Q score, and that was reiterated by Mr. Jacobs in his deposition testimony.
And then you testified in response to an earlier question I had that people, or that nobody seemed to notice the op-ed until Mr. Depp filed suit. Now, that was on March 1, 2019. Do you recall?
Yes, that's when the lawsuit was filed.
And why do you say that they didn't notice until then?
Because the op-ed piece, for most people in the industry, kind of came and went without much fanfare or much conversation. It was much more about I don't think very many people even know it was written until the allegations were made by Mr. Depp in the lawsuit. It kind of came in and out of the radar very quickly, if anybody even saw it at all.
All right. Between December 18, 2018 and November 2, 2020, our window here, has Mr. Depp continued to star in films?
So Mr. Depp, the article the op-ed piece came out December 18 and 20 of 2018. In January and February of 2019, he shot a film called Minamata, which was an independent film that it was what we call a passion project. He loved the script and wanted to do it. So he was able to film that after the op-ed piece. And then the Dior campaign, Sauvage, I don't know the exact dates of filming, but I know that it did air throughout 2019. And it's my understanding that he still may have that contract with Dior, so he continued that product endorsement. And then in in the spring and the fall, I believe it was, Mr. Depp was able to do press for the film Waiting for the Barbarians. He went to the Deauville Film Festival. He went to the Venice Film Festival. He was well received at the press conferences. life was at the same level for him in terms of his popularity over in Europe. They were still, he was still working on press for the films. And then, of course, he was scheduled to film Fantastic Beasts in early November of 2020.
Okay. And that's no longer the case, is that correct?
Objection, Your Honor.
What's the objection?
Can we approach?
Okay.
And that's no longer the case, correct, on Fantastic Beasts? I don't want you to say anything more than that. That's no longer.
It's no longer the case, correct.
He's no longer in that film, correct?
He was paid for it, but he does not star in the film.
Okay, thank you. Now, what, if any, effect did the op-ed have on Mr. Depp's fan following?
I don't know I don't think it had any effect on his fan following. Again, his Q scores didn't shift, and he clearly has a strong fan base.
In your opinion, what or who has caused the damage, if there is any, to Mr. Depp on his career and reputation between December 18, 2018 and November 2, 2020?
Objection, speculation.
Overruled.
Mr. Depp.
And why do you say that?
Well, again, filing the lawsuits, bringing to light the issues, is Mr. Depp doing that on his own accord? And any statements that were made by his team, Mr. Waldman or anyone else, is associated with Mr. Depp. And those statements that came out, the defamatory statements, which we'll talk about in a minute, were also put out by Mr. Depp's team. So in actuality, he's causing his own demise by bringing these lawsuits forward and continuing to kind of ignite the fire of negative publicity around both of them.
Okay. Are all of your opinions to within a reasonable degree of probability or certainty with respect to Mr. Depp's damages?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Now I'm going to move you to Amber Heard's damages. With respect to Amber Heard's claims for damages, on what subject have you been asked to offer your opinion?
So I was asked to look at the reputational harm and economic loss that Ms. Heard incurred due to the defamatory statements that Mr. Waldman, on behalf of Mr. Depp, made in April of 2020 and again in June of 2020.
And what materials did you review in forming your opinions?
Again, many of the same materials that I reviewed for Mr. Depp's case, which was the deposition testimony, the pleadings, the discovery, all of that was included, as well as expert testimony that was based on statistical analysis of negative social media campaigns that were created, as well as what happened. I talked to Ms. Heard's agents. I read their depositions. I talked to her publicist. I read her deposition. I talked to Ms. Heard herself to get a first-person accounting of what happened from her perspective after those defamatory statements were made. And then I looked at the, again, emails back and forth and texts back and forth with the studio, Warner Brothers, and other producers that the management team was working with to get Ms. Heard more work.
Okay. Now, before I go into the questions that I'm going to ask, I'm going to go ahead and just kind of define this so that we're all on the same page going through it. The jury has seen the three defamatory statements. They're defendants 1245, 1246A, and 1247. And I'm just going to refer to them as the Depp/Waldman statements in asking you all these questions. Will you understand what I'm talking about?
Yes.
Okay, good. Please describe Amber Heard's career prior to the publication of the Depp-Waldman statements.
So Amber's had a long career for someone who is not, is fairly young still. She was in over 50 productions, I believe including Aquaman and Justice League, but let's just say close to 50 productions. Well, certainly 50 productions before the defamatory statements were made. She had, a consistent working actor's career. Her agents were strategic as she started getting more work, that they wanted her to work with better and better directors, to have, the Danish Girl is a film that had a strong director and a strong critical acclaim. And then she went from that to getting Justice League, which is on the bigger budget, is a bigger scale movie, and then, of course, Aquaman and Aquaman 2. So her career was following a very nice, steady rise, and she was on the precipice of a meteoric rise with with Aquaman and Aquaman 2 prior to the statements.
Was Aquaman a successful film in terms of box office sales?
Aquaman was an extremely successful film. It made over $1 billion, and I believe it is the highest grossing DC comic film ever.
Okay. Now, what, if any, accolades did Amber receive for her role in Aquaman? And I'm going to call it, sometimes I'll call it Aquaman 1 just to make sure we don't get confused.
Right. So in Aquaman 1, there were many emails from the director and the producer and
Objection, hearsay.
She's just characterizing, Your Honor. She's not quoting them.
Well, I don't know where it's going. I'll overrule at the moment.
Thank you.
She got emails from the director and the producer stating that they loved her performance.
Objection,
and they loved her work.
hearsay.
You can't say what the emails say, but you can summarize them or characterize them. Can you do that?
Accolading emails of accolade from her, from the director and the producer.
Objection, hearsay.
Overruled as to that.
Thank you. Okay. What type of press opportunities did Amber have prior to the Depp Waldman statements?
So the press really loved working with Amber. She was on the cover of many magazines after The Danish Girl, after Justice League, after Aquaman. She was the cover girl, I think it was, of Marie Claire or Elle in the UK. She had a cover story of a big magazine in Mexico and Australia. They were, one magazine called her Woman of the Year, another one called her Role Model of the Year. So she got a lot of press. She did a lot of press, both in magazines, but also on the press tours and the press junkets that she did for the films.
And were some of those California Style, Marie Claire, Elle, Shape, Glamour?
Yes, there was a lot of them.
Objection, leading.
Overruled.
There was a lot of them, so I'm not, don't remember all of them, but it was, GQ, Elle, Marie Claire, the big magazines, both here, the UK, Eastern Europe, in Latin America, and in Australia.
And what about after the release of Aquaman, which was December 2018? How was her press then?
Well, the press tour was doing well, and they wanted to give her a lot more press. And I think up until the defamatory statements came out, she was on deck to do a lot of press. And then it
Objection, no foundation.
Overruled.
Please continue.
So the press and the request for press went silent after the defamatory statements were made, and which then the negative social media campaign ensued after that.
Now, what factors relating to social media does the entertainment industry rely on when considering an actor for a role?
Social media becomes a big part of how studios decide to use an actor or an actress in a film because they want to know how the general public feels about them. They want to know what the consumer feels about that actor. So when there's positive social media, that's a good thing for the actor. When there's negative social media, it can be very bad because not only can social media be directed at the actor or the actress themselves, but it can also be directed towards the movie, towards the movie company, towards the product that the actor or actress is working with. So it becomes very complicated and it can get very messy to continue working with an actor or an actress if there's a lot of negative social media around them.
Okay. And after the Depp Waldman statements, what happened on social media?
After the Depp Waldman statements, social media blew up with negative tweets and Instagram posts and, Facebook posts and Snapchat and trolling, as we call it. It was just negative. According to Mr. Schnell, there was over 1.2 million negative tweets about Amber using hashtags that used the words in the statement of the Depp Waldman statements, excuse me, that 1.2 million negative statements between April of 2020 and November or January of 21. It's a lot of negative publicity, and there was just a lot of what we call noise around Ms. Heard and her work of any kind.
Can you please describe to the jury what a negative social campaign is?
So a negative social campaign would be when a fan base, or in this case, according to both the forensic statistical analyst as well as Ms. Heard's agents and the product that she was working with, L'Oreal, and her publicist, it was a campaign that included both live accounts, live Twitter, people that actually have are individuals, as well as what we call
Objection. May I be heard?
All right, here come.
All right. Other than the bots, please describe the rest of the social media, the negative social media campaign. What's
The
involved?
fan base was very energized by the Depp
Yeah, let me just
the
ask
Depp
you-
Waldman. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
I
There's a lot
call-
in my brain right now.
It doesn't matter. Why don't I do this? Let me formulate a different question. How has the negative social media campaign been used against Amber Heard since the Depp Waldman statements?
Great. So the negative campaign has been used both to, let's fire Amber off of Aquaman, to the product that she had an endorsement contract with was L'Oreal, the makeup. And every time that L'Oreal mentioned Amber Heard and the product together, they would get harassed. Her publicist company was harassed. Any kind of movie that she was related to or television project that she was related to got negative attention from the social media world. Even the charities that she was involved with were getting hammered, if you will, or bombarded by negative social media, which made it difficult to work with Amber on any level because negativity was brought to their product, service, or film.
Okay. And is that negative social media campaign ongoing to this day?
Yes.
Okay. And you were talking a little bit before, I think, about remove Amber Heard from Aquaman 2. What were your observations with respect to that in connection to the Depp Waldman statements?
Again, the statements, the social media campaign, whether called, remove Amber from Aquaman or, negativity for her relationship in that film,